Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Newseum's Night TV studio and another edition of Inside Media. I'm your host, John Maynard. Well, last month, the war in Afghanistan entered into its 12th year, continuing as America's longest war in history. While an end date of 2014 is now in sight, the cost in lives and dollars has been staggering and will no doubt continue to mount. As of today, over 2,000 U.S. troops have been killed in Afghanistan and nearly 70,000 American troops remain. And on this Veterans Day weekend, it is only appropriate that we remember those serving abroad. Today, we are joined by ABC News senior White House correspondent Jake Tapper, whose new book, The Outpost, An Untold Story of American Valor, offers a compelling account about the 2009 attack at combat Outpost Keating in Afghanistan, which proved to be one of America's most deadliest battles in Afghanistan. By chronicling the attack, Jake's book also reveals the harrowing day-to-day experiences of our troops overseas. In addition, the book delivers the personal stories of the men and women stationed in this dangerous part of the world. Jake joined ABC News in 2004 before being named senior White House correspondent in 2008. He appears regularly on Good Morning America, Nightline, and World News with Diane Sawyer. Prior to joining ABC, he was a national correspondent for Salon.com and a columnist for Talk Magazine, and he has written for several other publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. Jake is also the author of Down and Dirty, The Plot to Steal the Presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jake Tapper. Jake, I do want to get to the book, of course, but we've got to discuss Tuesday's election.
Of course.
Which you, of course, covered in depth for ABC. President Obama, the decisive electoral college victory, but it was a narrow popular vote win.
In fact, more decisive now than it was an hour ago because the AP just called Florida for President Obama.
Okay,
so
there you go. Okay.
Thank you, Florida, for going up.
What does that mean, though, the fact that it was a pretty decisive electoral college, but a narrow popular vote for the country for the next 4 years?
Well, I think, first of all, probably it will mean a lot of the same. $6 billion spent on the election, and we pretty much have the same situation that we had a month ago. Divided government and Republicans controlling the House, narrow majority for the Democrats in the Senate, and a Democratic White House. It probably means potentially the same kind of struggles we've had in the last couple of years in terms of anything getting accomplished in Washington.
Right. I guess we're seeing possibly a slight sliver of hope of the Congress and the White House.
This is, of course, the week that we see slivers of
hope.
Okay,
well, that's what I want to ask you. You know, they're obviously talking about
it's next week
the looming fiscal crisis.
Everything gets dashed.
Yeah. I mean, any thoughts? Can they find common ground?
Well, they're going to have to, because there is, as everybody I'm sure knows, the fiscal cliff is coming. That is $6 trillion over 10 years in tax increases, or, I mean, it depends how you look at it, but they are lower tax rates that expire. So you can call it the expiration of lower tax rates, or expiration of the Bush tax cuts as shorthand, plus a bunch of other tax cuts, payroll tax cut, and other Obama tax cuts. And then also $1.2 trillion over 10 years in spending cuts that are imposed now because of the poorly named super committee and its inability to find $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction in a bipartisan way. Obviously, this would be a tremendous hit to the economy, and a lot of economists say it would send the fragile economy back into a recession. So they're going to have to do something. Right now, everybody's drawing lines in the sand. The president wants the Bush tax cuts, the lower Bush tax rates on the wealthiest Americans to expire, but to keep the others. John Boehner and Republicans in the House say all of them should be renewed, and we'll see what happens.
Just one last question about the election. Is there any one thing or things that surprised you about this election, either on the presidential level or the local level?
I don't want to be unkind, but I am surprised at how surprised the Romney team was by what happened. I thought that Mitt Romney had a chance of winning, and there were times that I thought he might win. But I saw absolutely no data that ever indicated there would be a Romney landslide, which is what his people legitimately thought. They legitimately thought there was going to be a Romney landslide. And for that reason, Governor Romney went to election night only with an acceptance speech in his pocket, not a concession speech. President Obama had both. He is described as shell-shocked by aides. And I feel bad, and obviously people go into elections thinking they're going to win, but the idea that there was no emotional or intellectual preparation, to me, it's not an election surprise, it's a post-election surprise, but it's stunning to me just because, just looking at the math, I was probably within ABC News, I was more bullish on Romney's chances than anyone else, I thought. Right. But I still looked at the map and said, Obama's ahead in Ohio, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and if he wins those 3 states, he wins. Right. And yes, there's a chance that those polls are wrong or that people will break at the end for Romney. So I think that the Republican Party has some soul searching to do when it comes not only to trying to appeal to groups beyond whites, but the Republican Party has some soul searching to do when it comes to how connected it is to just data, science, facts.
Right, right.
That surprised me.
I was wondering if you could address a bit of breaking news also, and this is getting into your book now, because you do mention quite a bit David Petraeus.
He is in the book.
He is in the book, certainly in Afghanistan.
No, it's pretty clean.
Yeah, right.
My references to him are.
How surprised were you to hear this news, and how quickly he resigned?
I have to say, as somebody who thought he knew Mark Sanford and Anthony Weiner, not only as politicians, but as people that I know, at this point, nothing surprises me. But I am surprised anytime anyone does something that can jeopardize everything you've built your life to build. Right. And maybe this will be used against me in 30 years. But it does surprise me. This is a guy who was known not only for excellence in his career and professionalism, but for being fairly ambitious and concerned about his career and his image and wanting to, potentially someday run for president. Right. And General Petraeus was the model for generals in the modern army. He was, we get into this in the book because actually McChrystal is profiled much more in the book because he made decisions affecting this outpost more than Petraeus did. But McChrystal's people around him saw Petraeus as a model. And the soldiers here know more about this than I do, but this new era warrior, poet, general, and some of McChrystal's problems came from that. But so yeah, it's fairly staggering.
Right. Well, let's get to the book. You've spent the last 2 years, 2.5 years, interviewing over 200 people about this deadly attack, as well as other battles that our troops engaged in Afghanistan. Why did you decide to tackle this project now, especially during this, what must have been a busy political year, busy 2 years for you?
Yeah. My son was born on October 2nd, 2009, my son Jack. And the next day, in the recovery room for my wife, in the hospital room, in the corner of my eye on the television, I saw this story about this battle, October 3rd. 2009, where 8 sons, I had just been gifted with a son, and 8 other sons were taken from this world. 8 American soldiers, the deadliest battle for the U.S. in 2009. And the way that the coverage was about Combat Outpost Keating was, they put an outpost at the bottom of 3 steep mountains, 14 miles from the Pakistan border. Why would anybody do that? That's so stupid. What a bunch of idiots are running the military. And that was a kind of the glib way that it was treated. And then I kind of waited for more. I'd been covering the Afghanistan war, but I'd been covering it from the comfort of the North Lawn of the White House. And I'd been covering the silly squabbles between the White House and the Pentagon and General McChrystal. I'd been covering the president's AFPAC review. I'd been covering troop levels and throwing around numbers like 10,000 and 40,000, numbers that don't really do honor to the people behind each one of those numbers and the families that each one of them have. So it just began to gnaw at me. Why did they put this camp there? And I started calling around and asking and researching, and soon enough I had a book project focused just on the battle. And then other troops who had been stationed there in 2006 and 2007 started reaching out to me. They'd heard that I'd signed this book contract, and they wanted me to know about their stories. So the book just became, it became an opportunity for me to tell those stories, and it also became an opportunity for me to solve this mystery. Why would anybody put a camp there?
Right. Well, let's get into that. Why would anyone put a camp there? It was such a dangerous location. And please tell us again, elaborate, what was so dangerous about where this camp?
Well, it's at the bottom of 3 steep mountains. I mean, it's, you know, it's basic. You don't even need to be in the military to know that you want the high ground. It's, you know, the children's game is not king of the valley, it's king of the mountain, and you want to be on top. But the reason it was put specifically there is because, one, the original goal of the outpost was to be a provisional reconstruction team, which is bringing economic development to the area. And they want to be, and it was all part of the Army's theory of counterinsurgency, which is winning over the populace. They also needed to be near the road. And the reason they needed to be near the road is because all the helicopters were in Iraq. Not all of them, but almost all of them. And so that's what they did. Now, within 45 days, it was so dangerous that the provisional reconstruction team was moved, but the combat outpost remained. And they began this long process of trying to win over the locals, and they did have some success. It was not completely futile. There were successes and accomplishments.
Right. Tell us about this, what happened in October, the final ambush, and just you go into such detail, not only on the attack on Camp Keating, but with all the battles. But tell us specifically what happened on that.
Is anyone here from 361, Cav? No.
Representing Justin.
Oh, okay. Oh, is that Amanda?
Yeah.
Hey, Amanda. Amanda is the wife of one of the fallen heroes of Camp Keating, Justin Gallegos, who passed. It's great to see you. What happened was the camp had been attacked basically from the day that they set up in 2006. But there is an arc to the success of the outpost. The outpost is almost the protagonist in the book. And there was an arc, there was success. There were times that they were winning over the locals and the attacks on the camp were going down. But there was then, that did change. And by the time that 361 Cav, Black Knight Troop, got to Combat Outpost Keating, it was pretty much, there wasn't, one lieutenant colonel described it as a self-licking ice cream cone, meaning the camp's only purpose was to exist and to defend itself. They weren't accomplishing much else other than that. And the area started getting more dangerous, but not necessarily around the outpost. But the area started getting more dangerous. And then there was a surprise attack on the morning of October 3rd, 2009.
Right.
And one of the things about the battle is that there was such incredible bravery by the troops who were there. There was such selflessness and such willingness to put themselves in harm's way to help each other, almost unthinkingly, almost just instinctively. I was interviewing one of the troops today for a Nightline segment we're doing about the book, and this is a guy, Zach Koppas, who he was a specialist, and he was at a guard post the entire time, being fired upon by himself. Right. What he was doing was incredibly brave. I'm sure most people would have left the Humvee and run into the dining hall and hid under a table. But he sat there the entire time firing, just waiting, and people would bring him more ammunition, and then he'd continue to fire. And all he could do was talk about how brave everyone else was. And the people who died at the outpost that day, people like Justin, and people like Stephen Mace, and there are eight of them who died that day. All of them died trying to help or save one of their brothers. All of them died in an act of, the first person to die was a guy named Kevin Thompson. He was in the mortar pit. What you have to understand also about this attack was, a different guy in 361 who I interviewed today, Chris Cordova, who was the chief physician assistant, spent the day in the aid station. He said, I hate to say it, but it was brilliant. It was a brilliant attack. These are not, these guys know what they're doing. The first thing they did was focus on the mortar pit so that the big guns could not be used. And the first guy to die was a guy named Kevin Thompson, this ne'er-do-well from Las Vegas, or from Reno rather, and who, found direction in the Army, and he ran out to man a gun, and he got killed. And it was just like story after story of that, with increasing bravery, with Michael Scusa running out into fire as if the bullets and mortars and RPGs were rain, running out into fire just to provide ammunition to people like Zach Koppas, who were manning guard stations. Justin Gallegos running to a Humvee to help people stuck in that Humvee. And it's just an incredible, I mean, their deaths are tragic, but the spirit of these Americans is unbelievable.
What ultimately did happen to the camp, Camp Keating?
It's a spoiler alert. After the battle, they leave. The Americans leave, right. So it's the lifespan of the combat outpost as it's formed in the summer of 2006, and it ends in October 2009. Right. Okay. And the U.S. But they don't get to go home. The guys who survived. There were 53 Americans there. 8 died. So of the 46 left, some of them had medical. Some of them were wounded, but most of them had to get back to work the next day from forward operating Bostic, operating base Bostic.
You've touched on this, but the book really does tell the backstories of many of these troops, some who lived and some who died. Tell us about some of the families you met and what stories really resonated with you. Were families reluctant to talk to you?
Some were, sure, and I don't blame them. I understand anybody's skepticism, and I never held it against them. There were people. I would be skeptical if I had joined the Army at 18 or gone to college and joined the ROTC and become an officer and served my country, been involved in this horrible thing, and here comes this slick TV reporter who wants to write a book about it. I would be skeptical too. Right. And to be completely frank, I sometimes or quite often feel unworthy of being the one to tell these stories because I didn't serve. Right. Getting to know these people who survived, the people who lost loved ones, has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And I've formed, I think, some lifelong friendships with some of them. And if this book does anything, if it can just open the eyes of some people to what these people go through for us, for you and me, for the people in this audience, so that we are safe. And we in the media, taking our cues from the American people, we don't pay a lot of attention to the wars. They're kind of bummers. Right. Nobody wants to hear about them anymore. Right. But what these people do for us, there were scenes in this book that I couldn't believe it when I heard what the facts were. Like, if anybody wrote it in a movie, you'd think that's really a little bit much.
Give us an example of that.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Just one off the top of my head is there was this, the commander of 371 Squadron, which is the squadron that pushed up north and first entered this area, Regional Command East, was a beloved guy named Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Fenty from around here, or his wife lives around here. His widow lives around here. Joe Fenty and his wife, she was pregnant when he deployed, and she had her baby 4 weeks before he was killed in a helicopter crash. One of the things about Afghanistan that I didn't realize until I wrote this book, or we started researching this book, is that the terrain there, the land, the mountains, the narrow roads, the weak infrastructure, is sometimes just as deadly as the enemy. And in fact, a lot of the people who were killed in that first year, Joe Fenty and 9 others on that helicopter crash. Ben Keating, the guy the camp is named after, died not because of any Taliban or any insurgent, but because these mountains are really very difficult to negotiate in a helicopter or a Humvee or a light medium tactical vehicle, a truck. Anyway, so Joe Fenty has died in this helicopter crash, and one of the men under him, Major Timmons, crying, gets permission from the colonel, Mick Nicholson, who's now a general, to call home, to violate military protocol, and tell his wife Gretchen, who is one of Kristen Fenty's best friends, and has been on vacation with their kids at Disney World, get back home now. Get back home now so you can be there for Kristen. Kristen was the head of what's called a family readiness group. These are the mostly wives who are there to help people pick up the pieces after a tragedy like this. But now she was going to have this tragedy to deal with. And she had just had a baby 3 or 4 weeks before. So Gretchen Timmons races home. This is Fort Drum. She brings her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law takes the kids, goes to the house. Gretchen Timmons runs to Kristen Fenty's house. Kristen Fenty opens the door. Hey, what's up? Has no idea. Gretchen Timmons spends the day with Kristen Fenty, and she has to pretend she has no idea what happened to her husband. And she spends the day with her, watching Kristen Fenty wrap care packages for her husband. And then the news comes on the TV about this helicopter crash. And there's only, I think, only one battalion in Afghanistan, so it's going to be somebody they know. The day ends. Kristen Fenty has still not been told. Gretchen Timmons goes home, tells her mother-in-law. Kristen still doesn't know. It's that kind of thing that happens that you're like, if that happened in a movie, you'd be like, okay, that's a little much.
Right.
But this is real life.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to talk about your process in putting this book together, because that story is so beautifully detailed in the book.
Thank you.
And even the firefights and the battles that our troops were involved with, right down to what the troops were yelling to each other in the heat of the battle. How did you go about recreating these scenes with such specifics?
Well, I interviewed more than 225 people for the book, which is the biggest project I've ever taken on. Obviously, as with any reporting, if you're not in the room, you are recreating to the best knowledge of people's memories. Right. So there might be people who remember things a little bit differently, but generally speaking, I think it comes about as close to accurate as it gets. Right. And it's based on what people remember saying and what other, as verified with other people. I had a lot of Army documents to help me pinpoint who was at certain meetings, who was at certain events. Right. But mainly it was the generosity of time that people offered me because they wanted these stories told. And the word, I mean, it's a fairly thick book, but the truth of the matter, it was probably 400 pages longer when I handed it in because there were so many stories I wanted to tell. Right. And the editor said, you want people to read the book too. Right. So.
Absolutely. We do want to get to questions, and like I said, we do have 2 volunteers in the green jacket, so please don't be shy and just raise your hand. I think I see one right, Maxine, right next to you there. Thank you. There you go.
I was wondering what type of pre-planned artillery support or aviation support and how quick it was supposed to be on site once they were attacked.
That's a great question. Actually, the commander of Camp Keating is here. I see him, but I'm not going to put him in the spotlight. The problem with where Camp Keating was, and some of you who served there, correct me if I'm wrong, but the problem is, it was very far away from any support. There was, let's see, there's a map here. I don't know how well you can see it, but so this is the scale in miles is like half of your forefinger is 5 miles. So this is Camp Keating here. The closest place there's really any air support is Forward Operating Base Bostic, which is all the way down here. But that doesn't really provide the kind of Apache support that you need. That really would be at Forward Operating Base Fenty, which would be down here. Bagram would be all the way over there. It could take anywhere from, and this was a problem with medevacs in addition to support, is that it could take anywhere from, it could take up to an hour and a half. And on the day of the attack, they were able to get Apaches from Jalalabad up in the air pretty quickly. The problem was, it was such a well-coordinated attack that the Apaches couldn't get close at first. And then eventually, the pilots of the Apaches started just doing some very brave stuff and putting themselves in the line of fire and getting shot themselves. Does any troops want to be more specific with information about? I mean, I think the other thing is also it was different every year. That's one of the other things you pick up from Afghanistan is that, you know, it's been said that that Vietnam was a 10-year war. It wasn't a 10-year war. It was a 1-year war fought 10 times in a row, and that's definitely true in Afghanistan as well. Except now it's a 12-year war, or 1-year war fought 12 times in a row. Every year it's different, but I would say air support 40 minutes. Stoney?
Yes, sir. You're looking at 40 minutes for fast movers. We were out of support of indirect fire support, indirect artillery.
This is Stoney Portis. He was the commander of Camp Keating during the attack.
He uses the term commander loosely, though.
Camp Keating, well, this is one of I'll tell Stoney's story very quickly. One of the problems with Camp Keating was the commanders kept getting killed. Tom Bostic in 2007 was killed. Rob Yeskes in 2008 was killed. Stoney took over from a commander that many thought was weak 2 or 3 weeks before the attack, and people were very excited about him being there. And then he was taking a helicopter ride up from Camp Keating to the observation post one day to do inventory to prepare for the closure, and it got fired upon, and the helicopter had to take evasive action and go back to Fort Operating Base Bostic. Once again, the enemy had deprived Camp Keating, and it was just a fluke, they didn't know this, but had deprived the Camp Keating of a commander, so that when the attack happened, Stoney was at Fob Bostic, going out of his mind, wanting to get back, wanting to get there. Anyway, that's Stoney. So he was the commander, but that's why he's modest about it.
To answer the gentleman's question, we were out of range, firing distance for the indirect artillery support. Air Force could be on point in about 40 minutes. Jake's right on. I mean, the book is incredibly detailed and accurate in those regards. To get air support, we didn't have any at Bostic, so down in Jalalabad or even further south. So typically we were looking in excess of 40 minutes for air support. I think it was about an hour to hour and 20 minutes before we saw them on this day. So. And
to beat back an attack from the high ground, which is what this always was, you needed air support. It was all, it's not to say that they couldn't be successful without air support, but you really needed the air support. One of the themes in the book is how often these battles end with air support. It's just an incredibly vital part of that mission.
Thank you, sir. I want to get, we have another question. Perfect.
Thank you. These Taliban insurgents, soldiers, where would they retreat to in the mountains? Where was their?
It's an interesting question. And one of the things that's interesting over the lifespan of this combat outpost is that the enemy changes. When they first come in to the area, the Taliban is not really a force. This other insurgent group called HIG, it stands for something that will be meaningless, but the HIG is the insurgent group. But they win over HIG. They win them over, the Americans and the local government. And when that happens, the insurgent forces, which are, generally speaking, gangsters, timber smugglers, criminals, religious zealots, and bad guys from across the border in Pakistan, which is, again, only 14 miles away, come in and really start taking over. Where would they retreat to? They retreated to 2 places. One was a lot of the higher-ups would retreat to Pakistan, and 2 is a lot of them were locals. A lot of them were local boys and young men. And that's the sad reality of that war. And certainly what went on in this area is that a lot of times the people you were trying to help were torn between wanting to join you and the fact that they had insurgents in their family.
As we wait for another question, I think we see one right in the 3rd row there. Let me ask you about the pullout date 2014, which has been announced. How well are Afghanistan troops trained at this point, and able to take kind of control of their own country? What's your opinion on that?
When I was there a year ago, at Forward Operating Base Bostic, which is as close as I could get to Camp Keating, which no longer exists, obviously. And when I was there, the guy in charge of Bostic was a guy named Major Dominic Edwards. He's with the 227 Infantry Wolfhounds. He thought that within a year or two, the ANA would be up to the task. But the bigger problem, and it's less discussed because it's less sexy, but the biggest problem is logistical support, that they don't have the ability to do that. And logistical support is everything when you're dealing with these incredibly high mountains. The ability to drive on roads or provide medevac services or resupply ammunition, that was the real concern. So I think it's less, I think that's the biggest problem. And I suspect we're going to be hearing more about the U.S. providing logistical support in the coming years.
You speak so factually about like all of these stories. Did you have any emotional trouble writing the book?
Yeah, I was a mess a lot of times. It's really, I mean, the stories are, you know, you're dealing with I'm just going to lean so I can see you through that camera. The stories are so moving, and the sacrifice and selflessness of our troops is so powerful. And, you know, I mean, one of the things that I get in a little bit in this book, but not enough probably, is what we're leaving, is how many of these guys are not doing okay now. They're back and they're struggling, because it's tough. It's really tough. And, you know, there's not one company that I wrote about that didn't lose somebody in some incredibly tragic and horrific event. And, you know, it leaves scars. There were, and it's, you know, it's humbling to be interviewing a brave, courageous soldier who is capable of much more valor than, you know, you could ever dream of acting upon. It's humbling to have them cry in your presence, telling you their story. It changed me. So, anyway.
We have a question right
Hi, I'm not sure. I hope I asked this right. At the Outpost, say there's 300 guys there in these little camps. Do we know how many
Wait,
people?
good guys or bad guys?
Good guys. And do we know how many people attacked them from above? Like 1,000? How were we outnumbered? Million to one?
There were during the final battle, it was 53 Americans were there, 2 Latvians, and about 20 Afghans. The estimated number of insurgents, and the Afghans were, by the way, almost entirely worthless in terms of fighting back the attack. The estimated number of enemy forces was about 350. So it's 53 guys in a fishbowl facing about 350 well-armed, well-trained Taliban who are staging a very, very smart, well-coordinated attack. They had been watching the Outpost for 3.5 years, and they knew exactly how everybody would react, and I mean, it was exactly the worst kind of enemy you want to be facing.
Looks like we have a question. She's going to bring you a microphone so we can hear you during the recording. Thank you, sir.
The fact that we only lost 8 people sounds unbelievable with those odds. Can you talk about that? And was it discipline? Was it valor? Was it equipment? You know, what was it exactly that allowed that success to come out of this?
That's a great point, because it's true. The fact that 53 Americans in this vulnerable position would be attacked by 350 Taliban and 8 would die, and that's no less tragic, but the fact is it could have been 53 that died. It's because of how incredibly brave and heroic the Americans were, that they didn't all run into the kitchen and get, you know, and hide and tremble, which is probably, you know, how most people I know would respond to something like that, is a testament to how brave and noble they are. And they all ran out and manned their guard posts. And the ones that weren't on guard duty that day were running around providing ammunition for the ones that were manning their guard posts. And they were looking for any way to beat them back. And the air support, obviously, was considerable. But air support doesn't just come in and just do what it sees. You know, the pilots don't just like roll in and decide what to do. They need to be told by spotters on the ground, lay down this kind of bomb in this place on this grid, and the forward observers need to be feeding that information. The guy who ended up commanding that day, for all intents and purposes, was Lieutenant Andrew Bunderman, who I think just recently left the Army. And Bunderman rose to the challenge, and he was calm and cool and collected and told everybody how to behave and like fed the information to the pilots. And there were some very, very brave soldiers on the ground literally giving their lives. But also there are potentially a couple people who have been put in for the Medal of Honor, who I suspect you'll hear more about in the coming months and years, and who acted without, knowing full well the peril that they faced, acted without any sense of their own mortality and out of any concern for their own well-being, running to save somebody, even though that's how Justin died. Justin was trying to save a guy named Stephen Mace, and Stephen he didn't make it, but it wasn't because of Justin. He made it all the way back to Fort Operating Base Bostic, but he'd lost so much blood. But that's how every one of these guys died, was trying to do something to beat back the attack.
Question on the top row there.
Foreign correspondents are really expensive, and it's great that you were able to recreate this, but what does this mean to you for journalism? Is the media doing enough on the war?
The media probably is not doing enough on the war. And first of all, I should say, in terms of foreign correspondents, like, I'm not a foreign correspondent, I'm not a war correspondent, and those people do incredible work, and I'm humbled by their work. Whether it's the Martha Raddatz, who does a lot of war correspondence for ABC News, or Richard Engel or Lara Logan, who, with our competitors, these are very, very brave people. No, there isn't enough. But I always think this when people fault the media, and I know you're not faulting the media, or you are but you're doing it politely. I share your view. But the truth of the matter is, if 3-hour-long documentaries about Afghanistan and Iraq got viewers, networks would put them on every night. The public doesn't want to watch them. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't cover the wars, but that ultimately is where the responsibility lies, because this isn't the BBC, this is a capitalist media or system, and we provide what the viewers want. And ultimately, the viewers don't seem all that interested in war coverage.
We have run out of time. If you do have further questions for Jake, you want to ask one-on-one, he will be signing copies of his book, The Outpost. It's a terrific read. I encourage you to read it. Jake Tapper, thank you for joining us here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jake. That was great. Well done. Well done. We're going to just go around, and then we'll start signing.